Be honest with me, if you were struck by lightning or gamma rays or whatever and ended up with powers, would you be more likely to become a superhero or a supervillain? I'm Andrew Boyd, and today on Top 10 Nerd, we are looking at the top 10 supervillains who would make better heroes. Some of our entries today have dabbled with hero work in the past, and some have done such horrible things that they probably couldn't make the switch even if they wanted to. But we're looking at it mostly through the lens of what if they had decided to do good before they had committed to doing bad. With that out of the way, let's dive in. Number 10. Shocker. Herman Schultz often comes across more as a villain by circumstance rather than someone intent on doing harm. When he was a child, his parents died, leaving him to fend for himself, and like many economically disadvantaged youths are sometimes forced to do, he turned to crime to support himself. He wasn't a particularly skilled criminal until he used materials in the prison workshop to create his vibro-shock gauntlets, which allow him to open safes as well as shoot concentrated blasts of air that can be used to destroy walls or deal forceful blows from a distance. Although other villains seem to relish in being criminals, with Shocker it usually feels more like he's gonna turn to the reader and say, well, it's a living! He has done some bad things, but he has been shown to have a sense of honor as well, such as in Guardians of the Galaxy number 29, when he and some of his fellow supervillains raided Avengers Mansion and were forced to team up with the Guardians to defeat a group of aliens that showed up and attacked both groups. When the fight was over, Doc Ock tried to convince the villains to turn on the Guardians, but Shocker and the other villains refused, not wanting to hurt the heroes after they had saved their lives. He has had multiple opportunities to kill Spider-Man, but has chosen not to, such as in Spider-Man number 83, when he opened a window and came face to face with an incapacitated Spider-Man. He basically said, nah, too easy, and left. It makes one wonder what kind of a person he'd be if he'd been afforded the same opportunities as some of the superheroes when he was younger. He could probably do quite a bit of good with his gauntlets, and frankly would probably get more respect as a C-list hero rather than a C-list villain. Number 9. Mr. Freeze. There is perhaps no more sympathetic Batman villain than Mr. Freeze. Although he has had several origins over the years, the most iconic one is that Dr. Victor Freeze was a simple scientist trying to find a cure for his wife Nora's deadly disease. In a tragic accident, Victor became incapable of surviving at temperatures above sub-zero and was forced to create a cryosuit in order to survive. He has developed a freeze gun capable of encasing his victims in ice and turned to a life of crime in order to fund his research and try and save his wife. Considering that the only reason he is working as a criminal is to save the people he loves, and how many times across different media he has been shown working with Batman rather than against him, one can't help but wonder what would happen if he decided to protect Gotham rather than terrorize it. Imagine how easy it would be for Mr. Freeze to stop most villains by simply freezing their feet to the ground and waiting for the police. Heck, if he sold his freezing technology to climate scientists, he could refreeze the polar ice caps, become the savior of mankind, and earn enough money to fund his research and save Nora. Number 8. Spot. It's amazing how similar the origins of a hero and a villain can be. Listen to this one. A brilliant scientist begins experimenting with dangerous radiation, and during a test gone wrong, is granted strange powers that will change their life forever. In Jonathan Owen's case, rather than working with gamma radiation, he was trying to reproduce the powers of the vigilante the Cloak, and opened a portal that transported him to a dimension of half light and half dark. He escaped, but was changed, covered with black spots which acted as portable space warps, allowing him to teleport himself or anyone or anything he wants. A common way he uses this power is to redirect a hero's blows, tricking them into punching themselves in the face. Spot's initial experiment was funded by the Kingpin, so when he emerged for the first time, he fought Spider-Man and Black Cat in order to protect his employer. But what if his experiment was being funded by someone a little less villainous, like say Tony Stark? Would he still have become a villain? Personally, I think his portal powers would be more useful on the good guy's side rather than the villain's. Sure, he can use a portal to rob a bank, but imagine being able to rescue people from a burning building with ease. Frankly, not many people think of Spot as a very effective villain, so why not use those abilities for something that would actually benefit humanity? You know, like scientists are supposed to do? Number 7. Mysterio. Quentin Beck started out as a gifted stuntman and special effects artist, but grew disillusioned with his career due to the lack of recognition his field received. Man, so far this origin story is aging really well. He decided to turn to a life of crime, allying himself with the Tinkerer and disguising himself as an alien in order to steal secrets from high-profile targets and sell them to the highest bidder. When his plan was foiled by Spider-Man, Quentin vowed revenge. He returned sometime later, posing as a superhero named Mysterio, and began framing Spider-Man for crimes in order to get his revenge. The Master of Illusion has tangled with the webbed wall crawler several times over the years, but frankly, if he wasn't so obsessed with getting revenge on Spidey, he probably could have just become an actual superhero. Now, I'm not saying he would be able to join the Avengers, but considering that his main motivator is recognition, and most of his schemes have just been convoluted scams that have ended with him being humiliated, he would have been more likely to achieve his dreams if he had put half as much effort into actually being a hero, rather than trying to fake being a hero while also framing Spider-Man. Number 6. The Riddler. When Edward Nygma was a child, he quickly showed that he had a gifted and powerful mind. His father was unable to come to terms with his son's brilliance and would abuse Edward, claiming that Edward's academic achievements were a result of him cheating. This caused Edward to develop a compulsive need to prove his intelligence, which resulted in him becoming the Riddler, a supervillain with the uncontrollable urge to leave riddles at the scene of his crimes. This tendency to leave clues usually led to him getting caught by Batman. He eventually overcame this compulsion and reformed, becoming an accomplished private detective in Gotham. He still has a massive ego, but he has helped Batman solve several murders over the years, and has even saved a few lives, including the intended victim of a copycat villain named Conundrum, and Dick Grayson. Considering how much he has accomplished as a good guy, it makes one wonder what he could have been capable of if he had been raised in a more nurturing environment and had put his genius mind towards good sooner in his life. Unfortunately, all of this character development was undone in the New 52 reboot of the DC Universe, and he is once again an unrepentant supervillain. Number 5. Poison Ivy. Although in her pre-crisis iteration, Poison Ivy used her plant powers for the singular purpose of accumulating personal wealth, her post-crisis version is a bit more interesting and is the version that we're talking about today. When Pamela Isley was experimented on by the mad Dr. Jason Woodrow, she developed her ability to control plants, as well as her ability to seduce and control people with the use of pheromones and kill them with a poison kiss. She commits crimes in order to further her goal of making the world safer for her beloved plants. Now, this may sound noble at first, but you have to keep in mind she wants to accomplish this by killing all of humanity. She is an eco-fascist, on a scale that makes Ra's al Ghul look like a pacifist. She tangled with Batman several times in this continuity, but did have moments of compassion and humanity, most notably in the No Man's Land story arc, when Gotham was destroyed in an earthquake, and she took over Robinson Park and even took in 16 orphans, feeding and keeping them safe and treating them like her own children. She delights in killing, often feeding her victims to her man-eating plants, but if she could be convinced to be a little more focused and less homicidal, she could be one of Earth's greatest heroes. She has been shown to be capable of creating tropical paradises in the middle of deserts. Just imagine the impact she could have on greenhouse gases if she started using this power to instantly replace clear-cut forests. In the New 52 reboot, she was brought a little closer to a hero, as her motivations were changed so that she no longer wishes to destroy humanity for her plants, but wants to take out the massive polluters to make the Earth better for everyone, humanity included. Her methods are still a bit too extreme for her to be considered a superhero, but hey, progress is progress. Number 4. Purple Man. Zebediah Kilgrave was a Soviet spy tasked with stealing an experimental nerve gas from the Americans. While attempting this, a guard opened fire on Kilgrave, accidentally hitting the vial of nerve gas. It turned Zebediah purple and gave him the ability to manipulate the wills of others using his pheromones. Zebediah has used this power for truly horrifying purposes. The Purple Man is beyond redemption at this point, but the ability to make people do whatever you tell them can be used for good, just as easily as it can be used for evil. We got a taste of how Purple Man could be using his powers for good in the Jessica Jones television series, but a more consistent example of this power being used for non-sociopathic purposes is his daughter Kara. Kara has the same powers as her father, but rather than be a villain, she instead became the superhero Purple Girl. She was a longtime member of Alpha Flight before eventually joining the Thunderbolts and adopting the new alias Persuasion. Further proof that I can tie any video to Alpha Flight. Number 3. Dr. Octopus. One of Spider-Man's oldest foes, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Dr. Otto Octavius was a gifted scientist before the 4 mechanical arms he created to help with his experiments were fused to his body, driving him insane and into a life of crime. Doc Ock actually did become a superhero when he swapped bodies with Peter Parker and chose to become the superior Spider-Man. Although still a temperamental egomaniac, Octavius was able to do a lot of good as the new webbed wall crawler, eventually even sacrificing his life so that Peter could regain control of the body and save the day from the Goblin King. Otto soon returned to life, but unfortunately returned to a life of villainy soon after. It must be frustrating for Spider-Man to fight his old foe now that he knows for a fact that Otto could be and was an amazing superhero for a time. Number 2. Lex Luthor. Superman's greatest foe is a billionaire industrial genius who consistently comes up with evil schemes to feed his ego under the guise of helping humanity. Like Elon Musk if he actually knew how to invent stuff. Lex has battled the heroes of the Justice League for years, but eventually ended up saving the Earth from the crime syndicate. This shifted public opinion on the supervillain, and deciding that he liked the attention, Luthor became a hero and even managed to force his way onto the Justice League. When Superman died in the events of DC Rebirth, Luthor decided to take over the mantle, showing up in Superman's cape and in a supersuit with the House of L symbol on its chest. Despite the objections of the pre-Flashpoint Superman, who had been transported to this new reality, it's a long story. Lex operated as a Superman for a while before his resentment of his fellow heroes' mistrust led him to return to evil. It's interesting to know that the only thing preventing Lex from saving the Earth is his own narcissism and ego, and I'm sure it actually makes his evil schemes even more frustrating for the Man of Steel to put up with. Number 1. Clayface. If there's one thing I hate about DC Comics, it's having to keep track of all the different continuities and origins that are constantly changing every few years. Let's go with Clayface's post-Flashpoint origin for the purposes of this list. Basil Karlo was a successful and talented actor who was disfigured in a car accident just as his film career was really starting to take off. He began using a chemical putty called Renew, which allowed him to reshape his face in order to try and preserve his career. When his supply ran out, he attempted to steal it from the Gotham chemical plant and ended up being doused in the dangerous chemical. This transformed him into the villain Clayface. Clayface is able to shapeshift in order to impersonate anyone he wants, as well as take the form of anything he wants, transforming his arms into dangerous weapons or suffocating his enemies by taking on a dense mud-like form. He was one of Batman's most dangerous villains for years, but the Dark Knight was able to see his potential for good. He offered him a spot on the Gotham Knights, and Clayface was able to make the transition from supervillain to superhero. Unlike other villains who have dabbled in good deeds but have ultimately returned to evil, Clayface actually seems to prefer being a good guy. Not only has he developed lasting friendships with his teammates, but he has also managed to convince other villains to try and redeem themselves when he was able to get the villains Firefly, Knockout, Cheshire, and Killer Croc to help him take out the evil Peacekeeper drones in the Fear State story arc. Villains have an unfortunate habit of returning to evil, but let's hope Clayface is able to resist the temptation and remains one of Gotham's most unlikely heroes. Any other villains who would make good heroes if they could just stop being evil? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more Top 10 Nerd.